The first scream came before anyone in the zoo even realized the baby had been born. Inside the dimly lit gorilla enclosure at Redwood Wildlife Park, a 420-pound western lowland gorilla named Bella sat perfectly still in a nest of straw, while 6 zookeepers watched from behind reinforced glass. The security cameras had been rolling for nearly 3 hours, capturing every painful movement of her labor, but suddenly Bella stopped making noise altogether. No grunting, no shifting, no movement. She simply stared toward the dark corner of the enclosure with wide, unblinking eyes that made the entire room uneasy. "Why is she looking over there?" whispered Marcus Reed, the senior night keeper, leaning closer to the monitor. Nobody answered him. The atmosphere inside the observation room had changed in seconds. Even Dr. Olivia Carter, the zoo's veterinarian with over 12 years of experience working with primates, slowly lowered the clipboard in her hands as Bella tightened both arms around something hidden beneath her chest. At first, the staff assumed the newborn was resting underneath her body for warmth. That was normal. Gorilla mothers often kept their infants close immediately after birth. But Bella's behavior wasn't normal anymore. Every time one of the keepers moved near the glass, she let out a low warning growl without even turning her head. Then she did something none of them had ever seen before. Bella reached behind her with one massive hand and dragged loose straw across the floor, covering whatever was beneath her so quickly that the cameras only caught flashes of movement. Marcus frowned. "Did you see that?" he asked. One of the younger keepers nodded nervously. It looked like she was hiding something. The room fell silent again. Rain tapped softly against the roof of the primate building, while the monitors flickered with grainy black and white footage from different camera angles. Bella remained frozen in place, breathing heavily, her dark eyes fixed on the same shadowy corner of the enclosure like she was waiting for something else to happen. Dr. Carter tried to stay calm, but deep down she felt the same growing dread spreading through the room. Bella had lost a baby 2 years earlier during a difficult labor, and since then she had become unusually protective whenever staff approached her nesting area. But tonight felt different. Worse. Marcus adjusted the zoom on camera 3, trying to get a better look beneath Bella's arm, but all he could see was blood-stained straw and part of the newborn's tiny hand pressed weakly against the floor. Then the hand stopped moving. "Oh no," one keeper whispered under her breath. Another staff member immediately turned away from the screen. For several terrifying seconds, nobody spoke. Bella lowered her head and gently rocked back and forth while holding the hidden infant against her chest. Marcus could feel his heart pounding. He had worked with Bella for nearly 8 years, and something about her expression made him deeply uncomfortable. She didn't look aggressive. She looked afraid. Suddenly, Bella snapped her head toward the cameras and slammed one hand against the concrete floor so hard the microphones crackled with static. Several keepers jumped backward in shock. Then, without warning, Bella slowly began to rise to her feet, and the moment she stood up, every person in the observation room started screaming. Nobody in the observation room could explain why Bella looked more frightened than dangerous as she stood over the hidden newborns with her enormous shoulders trembling under the pale security lights. Marcus Reed slowly stepped closer to the glass, careful not to startle her, but Bella immediately turned sideways to block his view again. It was not aggression. It was instinct. Deep, desperate instinct. Dr. Olivia Carter quietly told the younger keepers to remain calm while she studied Bella's face on the monitor. The gorilla's breathing was uneven, and every few seconds she glanced down toward the straw beneath her feet before checking the dark corners of the enclosure again, as if expecting something terrible to happen. What made the scene even stranger was the silence. Usually, after giving birth, gorilla mothers made soft grunts or low comforting sounds toward their newborns. Bella made none. The only noise coming from her enclosure was the rain outside and the faint rustling of straw whenever she adjusted her body to shield whatever she was protecting. Marcus could still remember the first day Bella arrived at Redwood Wildlife Park nearly 9 years earlier. She had been rescued from a closed roadside attraction in Missouri after spending most of her early life isolated in a concrete enclosure barely larger than a garage. Back then, Bella refused to make eye contact with anyone. She would sit in the farthest corner of her habitat for hours holding old blankets the keepers gave her, almost like a child clinging to comfort. It took nearly 3 years before she trusted any human enough to eat while they were nearby. Marcus had been the first person she ever approached willingly. Even then, Bella never behaved quite like the other gorillas. She noticed everything. Tiny sounds, new smells, flashlights reflecting against glass. Once, during a thunderstorm, she became so anxious that she carried armfuls of straw into a tunnel and hid there until sunrise. Another time, she spent nearly 2 days carefully covering a sick baby rabbit that had wandered into the enclosure after finding it near the fence. Dr. Carter often said Bella understood loss in ways nobody could measure. 2 years earlier, Bella had gone through a difficult pregnancy that ended in heartbreak after the infant failed to survive long after birth. Nobody at the zoo ever forgot the sound Bella made that night. For almost a week afterward, she carried a folded blanket through the enclosure, cradling it gently against her chest and refusing to let the keepers remove it. Marcus remembered standing outside the glass at 3 in the morning watching Bella rock back and forth completely alone beneath the dim heat lamps. Since then, she had become unusually attached to quiet spaces and reacted nervously whenever staff entered too quickly. That was why tonight unsettled Dr. Carter so deeply. Bella was not acting confused. She was acting terrified of losing something again. One of the younger keepers finally whispered the question nobody else wanted to ask. What if she thinks we are trying to take the babies away? Marcus looked toward the monitor. Again, Bella had lowered herself back down into the straw now, carefully curling her body around the hidden newborns while staring directly toward camera 3 mounted high above the enclosure wall. For a long moment, she did not blink once. Then, very slowly, Bella reached out one massive hand toward the concrete floor beside her and covered something small beneath the straw before pulling it tightly against her chest. Dr. Carter narrowed her eyes at the screen. There was already one newborn in Bella's arms. So what exactly had she just picked up? Marcus replayed the camera footage 3 times, but each time Bella's strange movement looked even more unsettling. The massive gorilla was no longer simply protecting the newborns. She was rearranging the enclosure around them with careful, deliberate precision that none of the keepers had ever seen before. While the other gorillas slept in the neighboring habitats, Bella remained awake long after midnight, dragging piles of straw, blankets, and even loose branches into a wide circle around herself. It looked less like a nest and more like a barrier. Every few minutes, she paused to listen toward the ventilation tunnels running along the back wall of the enclosure. Then she would quickly pull the newborns closer and continue building. "Why is she making the circle bigger?" one of the keepers asked quietly. Nobody answered. Dr. Olivia Carter stared at the monitor with growing concern because Bella's behavior was becoming increasingly difficult to explain. Gorilla mothers were protective by nature, but this was different. Bella was acting as if she believed something else inside the enclosure was threatening her babies. Around 1:30 in the morning, Marcus carefully entered the keeper access hallway carrying a bottle of formula and emergency medical supplies in case one of the infants needed assistance. Normally, Bella tolerated Marcus being nearby, especially during feeding time, but the second she heard his footsteps echo through the concrete corridor, her entire posture changed. She spun around instantly, gathered both newborns against her chest, and climbed onto the highest platform in the enclosure with shocking speed despite having given birth only hours earlier. Marcus stopped immediately. Bella was breathing hard now, her eyes fixed directly on the steel security door beside him. Then she did something that made his stomach tighten. Instead of threatening Marcus, Bella stretched one arm toward the door and began slamming the wooden platform beside her over and over while making short panicked sounds deep in her throat. It almost sounded like a warning. "Back away," Dr. Carter said through his earpiece. "She is extremely stressed." Marcus slowly stepped backward into the hallway, but Bella did not calm down. In fact, the moment he disappeared from view, she rushed down from the platform and began stuffing blankets into the narrow opening beneath the keeper door as if trying to block something from getting inside. One of the younger staff members nervously laughed and suggested Bella might simply be overwhelmed after labor, but nobody else joined in. The room had become too tense for jokes. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the security footage showed Bella pacing in slow circles around the newborns without resting for more than a few seconds at a time. She repeatedly checked the corners of the enclosure, paused near the ventilation grates, then returned to reposition the babies somewhere else inside the nest. The movement was obsessive, Dr. Carter quietly admitted she had never seen a gorilla mother relocate newborns this often in a single night. But the strangest moment came just before dawn. Bella suddenly froze in place and tilted her head toward the far side of the enclosure. The entire observation room went silent. A faint metallic sound echoed through the habitat. Clink, clink, clink. Marcus frowned because the noise was coming from inside the enclosure itself. Bella slowly lowered one newborn onto the blankets while keeping the other pressed tightly against her shoulder. Then, to everyone's confusion, she crawled toward the concrete wall near the old drainage tunnel in the back corner. The cameras captured Bella pressing her ear directly against the wall before abruptly backing away in terror. A second later, she grabbed both newborns again, dragged them across the enclosure, and for the first time in 8 years at Redwood Wildlife Park, Bella shoved a heavy feeding barrel directly in front of the tunnel entrance. The moment Bella shoved the feeding barrel in front of the drainage tunnel, the atmosphere inside the observation room changed from concern to alarm. Marcus Reed had spent years defending Bella whenever visitors or newer staff described her as unpredictable, but now even he struggled to explain what he was seeing. The gorilla was no longer simply acting protective. She was barricading herself inside the enclosure while 2 fragile newborns lay hidden beneath her arms. Dr. Olivia Carter immediately ordered the staff to increase monitoring around the habitat and keep all unnecessary personnel away from the primate wing until they understood what was happening. But word spread quickly through Redwood Wildlife Park. By sunrise, several supervisors had already gathered inside the control room, watching clips of Bella dragging objects across the enclosure, covering the newborns repeatedly, and reacting aggressively whenever anyone approached the access hallway. "This is not normal maternal behavior," one administrator quietly said while reviewing the footage. Marcus instantly disagreed. "She is scared," he replied. "That is different." But the others were no longer focused on Bella's emotions. They were focused on liability. 2 newborn gorillas represented millions of dollars in conservation funding and international breeding partnerships. If Bella injured one of the infants because of stress or instability, the zoo could face serious consequences. As the morning staff arrived, rumors began spreading through the facility that Bella had become mentally dangerous after labor. Some claimed she was rejecting the newborns. Others believed she was hiding injuries from the veterinary team. One young keeper nervously admitted that Bella's constant pacing and barricading reminded him of distressed primates he had seen during emergency containment training videos. Marcus hated hearing it. Bella was being judged like a threat simply because nobody understood what she was trying to do. Around 8 in the morning, Dr. Carter attempted a remote visual examination using a small inspection drone normally reserved for checking elevated structures inside large habitats. The device floated quietly over the enclosure while Bella sat motionless below with the newborns hidden against her chest. At first, Bella ignored it completely. Then the drone shifted slightly to the left, casting a faint moving shadow across the straw beside her nest. Everything changed instantly. Bella lunged upward with terrifying speed, grabbed a blanket from the ground, and threw it directly over the drone midair. The screen inside the control room spun violently before cutting to static. Several staff members jumped back in shock. One supervisor immediately stood up. "That is enough," he snapped. "This animal is escalating." Marcus clenched his jaw. Bella had not attacked the drone out of rage. She had reacted the same way any terrified mother might react to something hovering over her newborns. But nobody wanted to hear that anymore. The tension inside the room continued building throughout the morning as Bella refused food, water, and every attempt at visual examination. Worse still, the newborns had barely been seen moving since the middle of the night. Dr. Carter admitted quietly that prolonged stress after birth could become dangerous for the infants if Bella continued isolating them. Then another disturbing detail emerged. The thermal cameras showed Bella repeatedly repositioning the newborns farther away from the back drainage tunnel every time she heard noises from that direction. To the administrators, this only reinforced the idea that Bella's behavior was becoming irrational and unstable. But Marcus noticed something else. Every time Bella heard the metallic clinking sound from inside the wall, her entire body stiffened before she hurried to shield the babies. She was not reacting randomly. She was reacting to something specific. Unfortunately, Marcus was now the only person in the room who still believed that. Just before noon, the zoo director arrived and made the decision Marcus had been dreading all morning. If Bella continued refusing veterinary access by nightfall, the staff would sedate her temporarily and remove the newborns from the enclosure for emergency evaluation. The second Marcus heard the order, he looked back toward the monitor in horror because Bella was already staring directly at the keeper door again, as if somehow she knew they were about to take her babies away. Marcus Reed could not stop thinking about the way Bella reacted every time the metallic clinking sound echoed through the enclosure wall. It was too specific, too immediate. Long after the zoo director finalized the sedation order, Marcus remained alone in the observation room replaying the overnight footage while the rest of the staff prepared emergency equipment downstairs. Rain still drizzled against the skylights above the primate wing, and the entire building carried the tense silence of people waiting for something bad to happen. On the monitors, Bella sat curled tightly around the newborns with her back pressed against the far side of the enclosure, keeping as much distance from the drainage tunnel as possible. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. The strange part was not that Bella kept moving away from the tunnel. It was the timing. Every single time the metallic sound occurred, Bella reacted almost before the microphones picked it up clearly, as if she could feel the vibration before anyone else noticed it. Marcus rubbed his eyes and rewound the footage again. Clink. Bella stiffened instantly. Clink. She grabbed the babies tighter. Clink. She shifted the entire nest 6 feet farther away. Marcus frowned. Something about the pattern bothered him. Then he noticed another detail nobody else had mentioned. Bella was not only protecting the newborns. She was also constantly checking the concrete floor beneath them. Several times during the night, she pressed one hand flat against the ground before suddenly relocating the babies somewhere else in the enclosure. Marcus opened the maintenance blueprint files for the primate habitat on the computer beside him. The drainage tunnel in Bella's enclosure connected to an older underground service corridor built decades earlier when the zoo expanded the gorilla habitat. Most of the tunnel system had been sealed years ago after flooding damaged part of the lower structure. According to the records, nobody had entered those service spaces in almost 11 years. Marcus studied the map quietly while Bella shifted nervously on the screen behind him. Then he froze. A narrow utility line still ran directly beneath the nesting area where Bella had originally given birth. That cannot be right, he muttered. At that exact moment, another metallic clink echoed faintly through the enclosure speakers. Bella reacted instantly, dragging the newborns several feet farther from the original nest while making soft, distressed sounds deep in her throat. Marcus zoomed the camera toward the straw she had abandoned. For a split second, the edge of the bedding lifted slightly from below before settling again. Marcus stared at the screen, convinced his exhausted mind was imagining things. But then it happened again. A tiny movement beneath the straw. Not from the babies. From underneath the floor itself. Marcus immediately called Dr. Olivia Carter back to the observation room. When she arrived, he replayed the footage frame by frame. At first, she looked unconvinced. Then the bedding shifted again. Barely noticeable, but enough. Dr. Carter's expression slowly changed. "That is not airflow," she whispered. Marcus nodded grimly. The ventilation system had been shut down overnight because of the storm. Nothing should have been moving beneath the straw at all. Suddenly, Bella stood upright on the monitor and stared directly toward the same patch of floor. She slowly backed away while holding both newborns tightly against her chest. Then, in complete silence, she picked up one of the thick rubber sleeping mats from the enclosure and carefully laid it across the exact spot where the movement had appeared. Dr. Carter looked at Marcus in disbelief. Bella had not been randomly barricading the enclosure all night. She had been covering something. A cold feeling spread through Marcus's stomach as another distant metallic sound echoed through the habitat walls. This time, however, it sounded closer than before. Dr. Carter slowly turned toward the old maintenance blueprint still open on the desk. "We need to inspect that tunnel immediately," she said. Marcus Reed and Dr. Olivia Carter reached the underground maintenance access door less than 3 minutes later, their footsteps echoing through the narrow concrete corridor beneath the primate building while rainwater dripped steadily from old pipes overhead. The lower tunnel had not been used in years, and a rusted warning sign still hung crookedly beside the entrance reading "Authorized Staff Only." Marcus forced the swollen metal door open with both hands, and the stale air that rushed out smelled damp and metallic. Behind them, over the radio, the zoo director was still discussing sedation procedures for Bella upstairs, completely unaware that Marcus and Olivia had already abandoned the original plan. Flashlights trembling slightly in their hands, the two moved deeper into the forgotten service tunnel beneath the gorilla enclosure. Thick cables lined the ceiling, and puddles reflected pale beams of light across the cracked concrete floor. At first they saw nothing unusual. Then Olivia suddenly stopped walking. "Marcus," she whispered. "Look." Along the dusty ground near the tunnel wall were fresh scrape marks. Long, uneven scratches leading directly beneath Bella's nesting area. Marcus knelt beside them, his stomach tightening. Something heavy had been moving through the tunnel recently. Another metallic clink echoed somewhere ahead in the darkness. This time it sounded unmistakably close. Marcus slowly lifted his flashlight higher and froze. Wedged between two old pipes near the far corner of the tunnel was a broken steel animal carrier with one side bent inward. The cage door hung partially open, swinging slightly each time the distant clinking noise echoed through the corridor. Olivia stepped closer carefully, her expression turning pale as she noticed shredded transport labels still attached to the metal frame. "This is not zoo equipment," she whispered. Before Marcus could answer, a faint sound came from inside the carrier itself. Not a growl, not a hiss, a tiny whimper. Olivia immediately crouched beside the broken crate, while Marcus pulled the damaged door open wider. Both of them stared in complete disbelief. Curled inside the carrier was a tiny infant gorilla no older than a few weeks old, shivering beneath a torn blanket with a thin chain still loosely attached around one ankle. The baby was weak, frightened, and painfully underweight. Olivia covered her mouth in shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. Marcus felt his chest tighten as the truth crashed into place all at once. The metallic clinking sound, the movements beneath the floor, Bella blocking the drainage tunnel, Bella moving her newborns away from the nesting area, Bella barricading the enclosure all night long. She had known something was beneath her habitat before any human realized it. The tiny gorilla whimpered again, and above them, directly through the concrete ceiling, they suddenly heard Bella roar loudly from inside her enclosure. Not an angry roar, a desperate one. Marcus looked upward slowly, his heart pounding. Bella had not been trying to keep the staff away from her babies. She had been trying to protect all three infants at once. Olivia carefully lifted the trembling baby from the crate, while Marcus immediately radioed upstairs for emergency assistance. The response on the other end fell silent for several seconds after he explained what they had found. Nobody could believe it. Security footage from nearby highways later revealed that illegal animal traffickers had likely abandoned the infant near the zoo during the overnight storm after crashing through a maintenance fence behind the property. Somehow, the terrified baby gorilla had crawled through the old drainage system beneath Bella's enclosure while searching for warmth or safety. And Bella had sensed it before anyone else. She had spent the entire night shielding her own newborns while also trying to block the frightened orphan beneath the floor from danger. Marcus stood speechless in the tunnel as the realization settled over him like a weight. Upstairs, Bella had been treated like a threat. But all along, she had been acting like exactly what she was, a mother. The entire atmosphere inside Redwood Wildlife Park shifted the moment Marcus Reed carried the trembling orphaned infant gorilla out of the underground tunnel and into the observation room. Nobody spoke at first. The same people who had spent the entire night calling Bella unstable now stared silently at the tiny baby wrapped inside Dr. Olivia Carter's jacket, while rainwater dripped from the animal's thin fur onto the floor. One of the younger keepers slowly sat down in front of the monitors, visibly shaken. Another quietly covered his face with both hands after remembering the sedation order they had almost carried out less than 20 minutes earlier. But the hardest moment came when Marcus replayed the overnight footage again, knowing the truth. Suddenly, every strange thing Bella had done looked completely different. The pacing was not aggression. The barricades were not instability. The constant moving of the newborns had not been panic. Bella had been listening beneath the floor all night while trying to protect 3 frightened infants at the same time. Marcus felt sick realizing how close they had come to sedating her and removing the babies from the only creature in the building who truly understood the danger first. Dr. Carter gently examined the orphaned infant while the others watched in silence. The baby was dehydrated and exhausted, but alive. Every few seconds it made small trembling sounds and instinctively reached outward with one tiny hand. Marcus looked toward the monitor showing Bella upstairs. She was still sitting near the blocked drainage tunnel with her own newborns tucked safely against her chest, staring toward the keeper door with exhausted eyes. She had no idea the humans had finally discovered what she had been trying to warn them about all night. She was asking us for help, Marcus said quietly. Nobody answered him because they all knew he was right. Even the zoo director looked shaken now. Earlier that morning, he had spoken about Bella like a dangerous liability. But after hearing the full explanation from Marcus and Olivia, he could barely look at the monitor. One of the administrators slowly admitted something nobody wanted to say out loud. If we had followed through with the sedation. He stopped mid-sentence, unable to finish the thought. Dr. Carter carefully wrapped the orphaned infant in heated blankets. While tears filled her eyes, she remembered Bella covering the weak movements beneath the straw. Bella placing the sleeping mat over the floor. Bella dragging heavy objects in front of the tunnel. Bella had never once tried to hurt anyone. She had been trying desperately to keep the terrified baby calm and hidden until the humans finally noticed it. Marcus suddenly remembered something else from years earlier. During a severe winter storm, Bella once spent nearly an hour guiding an injured bird away from the flooded edge of her enclosure using only small movements of her hands and body. Back then, everyone described the behavior as unusual intelligence. Now Marcus wondered if it was something deeper than intelligence. Maybe Bella simply could not ignore fear when she sensed it in another living creature. Upstairs on the monitor, Bella slowly lowered her head and pulled one of her newborns closer beneath her chin. The sight completely broke the tension in the room. One keeper quietly walked out because he could no longer hold back tears. Another whispered that Bella probably heard the orphan crying beneath the floor before the humans even realized the tunnel existed. For the first time since the night began, nobody in the room was talking about sedating Bella anymore. Instead, they began discussing how to reunite the frightened orphan safely without causing Bella additional stress. Marcus looked back at the tiny infant wrapped inside the blanket beside Dr. Carter and then toward Bella watching the keeper door upstairs. His chest tightened painfully as he realized something heartbreaking. All night long, Bella had been terrified her babies would be taken away from her. And because the humans misunderstood her fear, they almost proved her right. Marcus turned toward Dr. Carter with tears burning in his eyes. "We are going to fix this," he said softly. "And we are going to do it Bella's way." For the next several hours, nobody inside Redwood Wildlife Park focused on public relations, conservation contracts, or visitor schedules anymore. The entire primate team focused only on one thing, making Bella feel safe again. Dr. Olivia Carter refused to remove the orphaned infant from the primate wing despite recommendations from outside specialists who suggested transferring the baby immediately to an isolated veterinary nursery. "No," Olivia said firmly while adjusting the heated blankets around the tiny gorilla. "That baby spent the entire night trying to reach Bella. We are not breaking that connection now." Marcus agreed instantly. Instead of separating the orphan, the staff began carefully preparing a quiet recovery space directly beside Bella's enclosure so she could hear and smell the infant without becoming overwhelmed. They dimmed the hallway lights, silenced unnecessary radios, and even rerouted morning cleaning crews away from the primate building to reduce stress. For the first time since the night began, the humans were adjusting their behavior around Bella instead of trying to force Bella to adjust around them. Upstairs inside the enclosure, Bella remained exhausted but alert. She barely moved except to reposition her newborns whenever unfamiliar sounds echoed through the building. Every now and then she glanced toward the blocked drainage tunnel before pulling the infants closer against her chest. Marcus could not stop thinking about how long she must have listened to the frightened orphan crying beneath the floor while nobody else understood what she was trying to communicate. Around mid-afternoon, Dr. Carter made a careful decision. Rather than bringing the orphaned baby directly into the enclosure, she placed a thick blanket carrying the infant's scent near the keeper door where Bella could approach it on her own terms. Marcus watched nervously from behind the safety glass as Bella slowly noticed the blanket resting near the entrance. At first, she froze completely. Then, with astonishing gentleness, she placed both newborns onto the nest and cautiously approached the scent. The entire observation room held its breath. Bella lowered her head toward the blanket and inhaled deeply. Her posture changed immediately. The tension in her shoulders softened for the first time all day. She touched the fabric carefully with her fingertips before making a series of low rhythmic sounds that Marcus had never heard from her before. Dr. Carter suddenly realized what it was. Bella was making reassurance calls. The same comforting sounds gorilla mothers use to calm frightened infants. Tears filled Olivia's eyes instantly. "She knows," she whispered. Bella remained beside the blanket for nearly 10 minutes, gently gathering it into her arms before carrying it back toward the nest with her own newborns. Even the zoo director stood silently watching now, visibly emotional as Bella carefully placed the scented blanket beside the babies and wrapped straw around all 3 spaces as though preparing room for another infant to join them. Marcus felt his throat tighten painfully. Bella was not simply protecting her own family anymore. Somehow, despite everything she had endured, she had already accepted the orphan beneath the tunnel as part of it. As evening settled over the zoo, the storm clouds outside finally began to clear. Warm orange light filtered through the upper windows of the enclosure while Bella rested quietly against the wall with both newborns sleeping safely against her chest and the orphan's blanket tucked gently beneath one arm. Nobody in the observation room spoke for a long time because the scene felt almost sacred. Earlier that morning, the humans believed Bella had become unstable and dangerous. Now every person watching understood something completely different. Bella had spent the worst night of her life doing everything possible to protect frightened babies that were not even all her own. Marcus looked through the glass as Bella slowly closed her tired eyes for the first time since labor began. The heavy tension that had gripped her body all night was finally gone. Somehow, after hours of fear, confusion, and misunderstanding, Bella finally seemed to understand one simple thing. She was no longer facing the danger alone. Over the following weeks, the story of Bella spread far beyond Redwood Wildlife Park. But inside the primate building, the humans stopped talking about the night as a miracle and started talking about it as a lesson. The orphaned infant slowly regained strength under Dr. Olivia Carter's care, and after several careful introductions through protective barriers and scent exchanges, the moment finally came when the staff opened the interior gate connecting the recovery area to Bella's enclosure. Nobody in the observation room spoke as the tiny orphan hesitated at the doorway, clutching the blanket Bella had carried beside her own newborns for days. Bella remained completely still across the enclosure while her 2 babies rested against her chest. Marcus Reed held his breath nervously, terrified of disrupting the fragile trust they had worked so hard to rebuild. Then the smallest thing happened. Bella lowered one arm slowly onto the straw beside her nest, leaving an open space between her newborns. The orphan stared at her for several seconds before cautiously stepping forward. The entire room watched in silence as Bella leaned down and gently touched the frightened infant's shoulder with 2 fingers. No tension, no fear, no confusion, just recognition. The orphan immediately curled against Bella's side as though it had finally found the place it had been searching for all along. Several keepers quietly turned away from the glass because they could not stop crying. Marcus stayed frozen beside the monitor, overwhelmed by the memory of how close they had come to taking everything away from Bella because they misunderstood her fear. In the weeks that followed, Bella became calmer than anyone at the zoo had seen in years. She stopped sleeping near the drainage tunnel. She no longer startled at every unfamiliar sound in the hallway. Most remarkably of all, she began resting again. Sometimes visitors arriving early in the morning would see all 3 infants sleeping beside her while Bella sat quietly beneath the warm sunlight streaming through the upper windows of the enclosure. The zoo eventually released a public statement explaining the discovery of the trafficked infant and the criminal investigation that followed, but online audiences around the world focused on something else entirely. Millions of people became captivated by the footage of Bella dragging blankets across the enclosure, blocking the tunnel entrance, and refusing to leave the frightened baby hidden beneath her habitat. Experts debated whether Bella understood exactly what she was protecting that night, but Marcus no longer cared about proving anything scientifically. He had seen enough with his own eyes. Some evenings after the zoo closed, Marcus would sit quietly outside Bella's enclosure while she rested with the 3 infants nearby. One night, Bella slowly approached the glass, carrying the orphan in one arm, while her newborns followed behind her. Marcus instinctively felt ashamed again, remembering the sedation order, but Bella simply sat down near the window and watched him silently for several moments. Then, without breaking eye contact, she carefully pulled the orphan closer against her chest and covered all 3 babies together beneath the same blanket. Marcus felt tears fill his eyes instantly because he finally understood what Bella had been trying to tell them from the very beginning. Fear had not made her cruel. Fear had made her protect more fiercely than anyone expected. Months later, after the storm damage around the old maintenance tunnels had finally been repaired, the zoo placed a small bronze plaque outside the primate building. It did not mention awards, funding, or conservation statistics. It carried only a single sentence chosen by the staff who witnessed Bella that night. Sometimes the creature we fear most is the one trying hardest to protect what we failed to see.